I've made your goblin stat blocks, me lord. Whew. Oh, man. Hello, everyone. DM Dungeon Mastery here. Now, you may be saying, DM Dungeon Mastery, where have you been? You announced this creature rework weeks ago, and it's just now getting to your channel? And to that I say, dear viewer, procrastination, ADHD, crippling depression. It's here, okay? And I made way too many of them because I have a weird perfectionist complex where I feel like you guys are gonna get mad if I hype something up unless I make a ton of things for you. So, let's get into the video now. So what is the biggest problem with the 2014 Goblin? Well, there's only two of them, and one of them is a boss monster that you're not supposed to use more than one of, so really, there's one of them. It's essentially the equivalent to a ghoul and a ghast situation, where a ghast is pretty much the same thing as a ghoul, it just has an extra ability upon it. Now with the goblins, on Monster Manual 2014 page 116, you'll notice, you get a whopping 2 stat blocks. Now those are nice at low levels. Goblins are the most common low-level monster that you're going to use, and you know you're going to use it. You're going to sit there and say, what monster can I throw at them that's not a goblin? And then you're just going to use a goblin anyways. We both know you're going to do it. Everybody does. But the problem with the goblin is, once you get past maybe 6th level, you're never going to see him again, unless you're fighting a hobgoblin camp or an orc camp, and these are just lower level, slave labor creatures that the orcs and the hobgoblins use to carry around their loot. But the problem is, goblins have so much personality, and you want to use them at higher levels, right? Wizards of the Coast will tell you that bound accuracy makes them usable at all levels of play. In order to challenge a 10th to 11th level paladin with a shield, plate armor, a Shield of Faith spell cast upon them, do you think that a goblin with +4 to hit is gonna hit that paladin? He's not gonna hit that paladin, I'm gonna tell you. He's not gonna hit it. I know, it's a spoiler. Spoiler warning. He's not gonna hit him. What is going to happen is you are going to have to shove about 20 to 30 of these guys into the game all at the same time, which I know 90% of you don't have 30 goblin miniatures laying around, nor do you want to have to control 30 different goblin tokens on your VTTs. So what I have gone and done today is I've taken the goblins with the design philosophy in mind that they should still be low level. So there was a common complaint that is tossed around, and that is continuity is a problem in D&D. You're not really sure whenever you're fighting a monster as a player character if it is going to make sense for what it looks like. And I know that sounds weird to say, but a goblin is about the size of a small child, a small human child in the real world. Now you would think, if you followed Wizards of the Coast's CR rating, you would have to increase the hit points to a very high amount in order for these to be challenging to high-level players. So you're talking, a bunch of goblins running around with 80 hit points. However, that makes absolutely no sense. Why would a little creature that is the size of a human child have 80 hit points in the world of D&D? I wanted to take what Wizards of the Coast gave me, which is the Goblin boss has 6d6 hit die, while the regular Goblin has 2d6. So I look at the regular Goblin as, that's about what a commoner might be, and the Goblin boss is what the highest echelon of a Goblin might look like. So I didn't want to go above 6d6 hit die. That way, no matter what you do, they're still going to be relatively squishy for the challenge rating that you're encountering them at, even if you somehow made a challenge rating 20 Goblin. I don't think you should go over 6d6 hit die. There's only so much punishment that a small creature can take. Same with if I do the fairies one day. I probably won't have them go above 1 or 2 hit die, because they're tiny, they're very small. A hammer should splatter a fairy across the stone. Anyways, keep that in mind. Now also remember that goblins are very, very versatile in the places that you can encounter them. You have forests, grasslands, hills, and even in the Underdark in some circumstances that you can encounter them. So with that, I wanted to take goblin lore, in which there is very sparse lore for these for some reason, especially when it comes to Maglubiet, their god, who you would think, you know, oh, with a goblin, surely their god and deity has a lot of lore. He doesn't even have colored art, wizards. It's 2024, the god of the goblins doesn't even have colored artwork. What are you thinking? So here's what I dislike about challenge rating before I show these first two goblins. Challenge rating is inherently flawed in that even though a creature has low hit points, it disregards everything else that the stat block can do. So you have an Intellect Devourer, which is, I think it's a CR1 monster. It's a low CR monster. I'll probably put it up on screen. That can one-shot a 20th level Barbarian if Intelligence is his dump stat. So what I think we should do going forward is instead of challenge rating, we have tiered monsters. And what I mean by tiers is in the 2014 Dungeon Master's Guide on page 37, you have 4 tiers of play. Levels 1 through 4 is first tier, level 5 through 10 is second, level 11 through 16 is third, and level 17 through 20 is fourth. That way, you can put something like the Intellect Devourer and say it's actually intended for tier 3 play, but it's still a trash mob. If you play a lot of MMOs, you know what I mean by that term. Or a moot enemy, which is just a weak, grunt, run-of-the-mill monster. Now, after this Goblin rework, that's the system that I'm going to be using. I won't be using challenge rating anymore. So, with that being said, let's look at the first two goblin stat blocks that fill the low-level niche of gameplay. So the design philosophy going into these is 4 key points. They are relatively fragile, they don't fight fair, they are weak individually, and they are sneaky. Okay, so I've heard a lot of people saying that goblins are much too strong at low level for what they can do because they output a lot of damage. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that Wizards of the Coast took a Goblin Archer and a Goblin Fighter and they put it into the same stat block. So what I took with these smaller creatures is I just took those and I pulled them apart and made 2 separate stat blocks. So we have a Goblin Archer and a Goblin Grunt. Key differences here is the Grunts have a little bit higher AC, they deal a little bit more damage up close, whereas now you look at the Goblin Archer, does more damage at range, less damage up close. You'll notice that I have given all of my goblins Fury of the Small, like the player character goblins, because why not? Some people suggested that I actually make them deal damage equal to their proficiency modifier, but I wanted these to scale harder, so I just left it as their challenge rating for now. But in the future, I might end up changing it to proficiency bonus. But I already had that epiphany after I had made 30 of these stat blocks, so I didn't want to go through and change all of them. I'm sorry. For the Goblin Archer, I gave it a perception proficiency just because that makes sense. And then everything else is pretty much self-explanatory. So those are just your simple, basic, super low-level creatures. Let's look at some more advanced ones. You know, we'll move pretty briskly through the lower level goblins because a player character at these lower levels can be knocked unconscious by a stiff breeze. So most of these don't have too interesting of an ability to write home about, but when we get to the higher level stuff, that's where a lot of the cool things come out. But the Goblin Warrior, this is where I tried to make sure that the goblin represented that it didn't fight fair. Now, most of that is going to come from how you play the goblin on the table with its combat tactics, but you can put some things into the stat block that help you with that. So, for the Goblin Warrior, I gave it a much higher AC. I gave it a little bit higher of a dex mod. It has an acrobatics proficiency. Every single goblin that I make will have stealth proficiency. That just, to me, seems like something that the entire goblin race as a whole should be good at. This goblin has a fighting style of dueling, so they deal 2 extra damage when they're not dual wielding or two-handing weapons. That's just a passive, though. You don't have to keep track of that. It's already included in the damage on the stat block. You'll see this goblin has multi-attack, and it can use its bag of dirt. Now, what does the bag of dirt do? Well, let's look. So it makes 2 melee attacks, and then if it hits with one of its melee attacks, it can pocket sand, throw a bag of dirt into the creature's eye that it's fighting. Now, you'll have to... Actually, I put it into the stat block. It's only large or smaller creatures, because they can't throw dirt up to a huge giant's eyes. That wouldn't make sense. The dirt's not going to travel that far, unless they're standing on top of the giant, attacking him, and able to reach his eyes, but that's up to your discretion. I can't take into account every little situation, so that would be up to your DM discretion. But anyways, the bag of dirt has a range of 5 feet. It is special equipment, and the goblin can use looky here! Looky here! The goblin grips a handful of sand and tosses it at the eyes of a larger, smaller creature. That creature has to make a DC 13 con save, that is to try to close your eyes quick enough. If they fail, they are blinded for 1 minute until they use an action to wipe the sand from their eyes. Now that's going to make goblins much more annoying. I think goblins should be frustrating and annoying to fight. Very easy to deal with. Get rid of them. 1 hit from a barbarian's axe, you're going to split a goblin in half, but they're going to make you have a hell of a time doing that, because you're going to have disadvantage on your attack rolls. They're going to be hiding, coming out of hiding, shooting you, running away from you, throwing sand in your eye. That's what it should feel like fighting a goblin. They don't fight fair. They use these crazy guerrilla warfare tactics. Not quite like a kobold where they're going to set a bunch of traps for you, but they're going to be a little bit more annoying to deal with. With the Goblin Warrior, I think this accurately represents that. You're going to be able to do a little bit more with this guy. Now, and he has 2 melee attacks with the 3rd extra action of throwing the dirt in somebody's eye, so I think that's a pretty cool thing. Let's move on to the next one. Keep in mind, there are a lot of goblin stat blocks that I've made. They're not all going to be featured in this video. I gotta make a little bit of Skrilla for the hard work I put into these, but I'm going to try to show you some goblins from every type of goblin that I've made. So the final one for like the melee warrior goblins I'm going to show you is the Goblin ScrapStack. Now this goblin is very cool. This is heavily inspired by David Bowie's The Labyrinth, as you can see over my shoulder. I love that movie. And I really like some of the really heavily armored goblins in that movie. Not to mention there's this really cool mod on Warhammer 3 Total War. It's a Noblar mod, and these goblins in this mod are called Rust Buckets, and they are just Noblars with tons of heavy armor on. They're not insanely strong, they're not stronger than a human-sized or an orc-sized paladin, but they're hard to hit. They don't have that much hit points, they only have 6 hit die. Remember what I said. Don't go over 6 hit die for a small creature. Doesn't make sense, unless it's a player character. These guys have a lot going on in their stat block. Their ability scores are a lot higher than the average goblin. That comes from training, though, not in that an ogre is born with probably 18 constitution, 19 constitution, where these goblins have to train very hard to get to that point. And their hit points reflect that they are still squishy. These are considered challenge rating 10, but these are not a single creature that you're going to throw against a level 10 party, because it doesn't make sense. But I think you should use these at like tier 3, tier 2 play. These have a lot of different passives going on. They also have saving throws, so giving creatures like this a saving throw really does increase their survivability. They do have some damage resistances in poison, bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. With the art on screen, you'll understand why. They're wearing a lot of armor. They do have a sense of blind sight within 5 feet, and I picture that as they've learned to somehow listen out for their surroundings. Being that they're in this really heavy armor, it's very hard to see. Like, medieval knights had a little tiny eye slat that they had to see through, and that pretty much left their field of view to this. But in the fantasy world, I picture maybe the goblins have an awareness around them, being that they've trained in this super heavy armor. These are the closest thing that you're going to get to a goblin honor guard. So these goblins have a really cool fighting style that I came up with called Juggernaut, and they just have a +3 bonus to their armor class. So you'll see a 23 AC with a shield. Pretty nasty. These goblins crit on attack rolls of 18 through 20. They have impenetrable armor. This is what's really going to make these goblins really annoying to damage. Unless, of course, you cast heat metal and you burn them inside the armor. This is if an attack damages the goblin for less than 20 damage, it is instead dealt no damage. Now that's an attack. So you can say that, you know, heat metal would probably damage the goblin. But an attack roll, like a barbarian's axe, I should probably say attack roll. I might change that before I upload these, just so that it makes more sense. Brute. The goblin deals an additional damage die on hit. Indomitable. They re-roll a failed saving throw, which is kind of like legendary resistance, but for fighters. Now here's where the really cool thing comes in. This is disgusting weaponry. The goblins' weapons are rusted and filthy, dealing an additional 2d6 poison damage on a hit, and possibly inflicting the Blight Crawl disease. And Blight Crawl is, when the creature is infected, it is poisoned. At the end of each short or long rest, the creature must repeat the save. On a failure, its constitution score is reduced by 1d4 as the necrosis spreads. Yes, constitution score getting reduced is very dangerous, because that's going to lower your max HP, and it's going to hurt you pretty bad. And if that con score is reduced to 0, of course, creature dies. Moving into its actions. It's got a Rotten Scimitar, just does an extra 2d6 poison damage. That's 4d6 damage on a hit, and they make 3 melee attacks. Or, alternatively, they can make 2 ranged attacks. So they also have a Rotten Dagger. The reason why a lot of these creatures have daggers is it's just a sidearm that they have in case they get disarmed of their main hand weapon. Most creatures are going to have a sidearm on them. That's why they have daggers. You can take the daggers out if you're just like, well, I'm never going to use it, doesn't matter. You can take it out. But I put it in there just for brevity, or I guess continuity, I guess would be the better term. And then of course we have the light crossbow with rotten bolts, so their crossbows also inflict Blight Crawl. They're just these really disgusting goblins that have had armor that they've pulled out of scrap heaps full of weapons and armor, probably hammered into these suits, and they probably just live in these suits. They probably never take them off. I don't know. You can come up with the lore for them, fit them into your world. These are the goblins that are going to be protecting the Goblin King or whatever. And then of course we still have Nimble Escape, where they can disengage or hide as a bonus action. That's going to make for a very annoying creature that doesn't have a ton of hit points. It'll still be knocked down by a fighter in one turn. You're not going to have a horde of these monsters running at your players, but you have a creature now that can put up somewhat of a fight against a higher level party. And impenetrable armor is still up to you for how you want to rule it, because I know that's going to be controversial. I would say that if they take if they take less than 20 damage from a fireball, they don't take damage from it. Why not? That you have to somehow penetrate the armor a different way. Anyways, that's it for the scrap stack. I hope you like that one. Let's get into some of the roguish goblins now. So going into these rogues, I want you to keep in mind that in goblin society, might is not really a relevant thing. Goblins are not strong individually. They are not creatures that are going to be able to walk up to an orc and beat them in a one-on-one combat situation. I feel like goblin rogues are what's going to excel in goblin society. So I made the rogues pretty deadly, but they're very, very squishy creatures. They have no constitution bonus to their hit points. They can still have 6 hit die, but only have 20 hit points in some scenarios. So let's look at the Goblin ShivSkitter. This is not the lowest level Goblin Rogue. You'll have some of those in there. If you go to my Patreon, you'll get those for free. So looking at the ShivSkitter here, they have a 20 dexterity. They have a saving throw proficiency with dexterity. They have sleight of hand skill that makes sense. These are clocked in at CR4, but they could be a little higher or a little lower depending on what your opinions are. These goblins have sneak attack, and that sneak attack goes up with each tier of rogue that I made. They have, this is my favorite creation that I've made so far. This is called Dodgy Bastard. This is while the goblin isn't exhausted, its speed isn't reduced, and it isn't incapacitated, it benefits from the dodge action. So you have disadvantage on attack rolls against this creature. Keep in mind it only has 14 hit points, so that's how it stays alive. Survivability without giving it hit point bloat. That's what I wanted to do with rogues. I wanted to make them hard to hit. They're super dodgy. They're really fast. They're darting through the shadows, darting through the trees, and you're trying to shoot them with your bow, and they just keep dodging out of the way. Now, if it is exhausted, it doesn't have this. If its speed is reduced, it doesn't have this. If it is incapacitated in any way, it doesn't have this. So it's one of those three. That's all it would take to essentially disable this passive that it has. And then of course it has evasion, so if you throw that fireball and it makes that dexterity save, it's not going to take any damage. Now let's look at the actions here. So this is the only rogue goblin that I made that has multi-attack, and that's because I picture them holding 2 daggers. They have 2 poison-coated daggers. Now these are coated with spider venom, which is not an actual in-game poison, but goblins in the lore, if you look through the Volo's Guide to Monsters, there's a lot of really rich lore in here for the goblins, probably the most that you will find in an official source book. Anyways, they favor having wolves and spiders. That's like their 2 most common domesticated pets that they have within their society. So I took the giant spider stat block poison and I just made it that they coat their weapons with that poison specifically. So it does the exact same thing, but this goblin has multi-attack, so he can stab you twice, force you to make 2 constitution saves, and if you fail, you're going to take 2d8 poison damage. If that reduces you to 0, you become paralyzed even after you regain HP for 1 hour, unless the cleric casts some sort of restoration magic on you. These goblins also have blowguns, which means they're completely silent from a distance. They're in the trees. They shoot the little blow dart gun out, hit you in the neck. Bam, you get hit with that spider poison. Pretty dangerous if they make an ambush and surround you, which is what they're going to do. They also have smoke bombs, so they can use this ability. They can toss these smoke bombs out, making these giant spheres of smoke that you can't see through with the heavily obscured condition, unless you use strong wind or similar magic to blow it away, and then if you're inside the smoke, you're blinded. Now the goblins can't necessarily see into that, so you'd have to get creative, but they can use that to get away. They also have Nimble Escape still, making them able to disengage as a bonus action. They run in, stab, disengage, get out of there. Pretty cool. Now that's a lower level rogue. Let's look at a higher level one. So this is the end-all, be-all Goblin Rogue. This is the Goblin Rogue that the BBEG hires to come after the party. These are the most feared roguish creatures in Goblin society. This is a Goblin Nightstinger. These are not lore accurate. There's nothing in the lore that states that these exist. These are my own creations, but I don't see any reason why these cannot exist. These have a 26 dexterity score. Their HP, though, keep in mind, their HP is 21. Still very low. If you can somehow magic missile these guys, they're done. You're going to blow them up really easily. But if you don't have a way to hit them with guaranteed damage, you're going to see how hard it is to hit these guys. So, moving through here, their saving throws are really high because of that 26 dexterity. Let's look at, they have Dodgy Bastard, so your attacks have disadvantage against them. They have evasion if they succeed those dexterity saves, which they have proficiency on, plus 12 to dex saves, so you cast those fireballs, you're probably not going to damage them. Hoodwinker, this is a good one. This is a scary one. If the goblin makes a ranged attack while it's hidden, it remains hidden. So that's a pseudo-invisibility until you literally walk around the corner that they're hiding behind and reveal them. Then they have Get Killer. This is the most dangerous ability on this stat block. If the goblin is hidden from a creature and its attack roll exceeds the target's AC by 5 or more, the attack is a critical hit. Consistent critical damage. Now, why is that so scary? When a goblin crits in this book, the 2014 Monster Manual, it's only going to deal 2d6. Well, I'm going to tell you why it's scary, because they have wyvern venom coated on their weapons. So this is not the wyvern venom from my wyverns. This is like straight out of the official rules, because I felt like it would be a little bit overpowered to cause you to actually just die. So maybe it's a little bit diluted because these are goblins. They probably don't have the most nimble hands when extracting wyvern venom. I couldn't think of a word to really use for that. So when you get hit with their weapons, you have to make a DC 19 con save, and if you fail, you take 12d6 poison damage. Now, with Get Killer, if they exceed your AC by 5 or more, and they have a plus 12 to hit, keep in mind, that 12 becomes a 24d6 poison damage if you fail that con save. And if you succeed, you still take half damage, so these are very deadly. These absolutely will put up a fight against your high-level characters. Put like 3 or 4 of these in amongst a mob of other goblins that hold your players in place. You have a couple of these guys shooting out. The wizard's going to go down and probably one hit from these, and he might even get one shot. But they're high level, they have diamonds, they have Revivify, they have all these other things that they can use to revive each other. You can't pull your punches against high level player characters. They do have the Venom Crossbow, and then they have a Malice Poison Bomb. So I took the Malice Poison from the official rules and I turned it into an area of effect poisonous gas bomb. So, you know, if you're stuck in this, you have to make the con save and you're poisoned for 1 hour if you fail. However, if you fail and you are poisoned, you are blinded while you're poisoned. So yeah, these are not things that should be taken lightly when you're fighting these creatures. And they also have Uncanny Dodge. Not that that's going to necessarily save them with 21 hit points. Most attacks that hit them at this high level will probably actually still kill them. But if on the off chance it can save them, they will use that. Now, you could use this against a lower level party and have this be a named goblin in your world. Maybe it is a goblin known as the Nightstinger. It's only one goblin. And that way, this is actually a boss fight where he becomes the End from Metal Gear Solid, and he's just hiding, shooting you from really far away, hitting you for all this damage, causing your players to be genuinely fearful. Shooting, running away, never getting within melee. If you do get within melee, he does have a way to defend himself with his short sword. That is going to be the Goblin Nightstinger. I hope you like that one. We're not done yet. We still have a couple more goblin stat blocks to go over, so let's keep going. Sorry also about the weird camera glitches. I don't know what's going on with OBS. It just keeps cutting the screen and glitching. I just changed a bunch of stuff, so I might look a little different, but hopefully it fixed it. I don't know if it did. Let's move into some of the Goblin Clerics that I made. These are Clerics of Maglubiet, okay? You know, the Goblin God, the thing that you would think would have a lot of lore behind it, but for some reason has like 2 paragraphs total and not even modern art. It has art from like 1st edition. It's black and white. I don't understand. How do goblins not have updated lore for their single deity that they worship? Doesn't make any sense to me. He's mentioned in all of these older editions, yet he has no lore or artwork for him. So I took what little I could from his lore and I tried to make these represent priests of Maglubiet. We have 4 different tiers. I'm going to show you the lowest tier, and then if you want some of the higher tiers, you are going to have to unfortunately subscribe to my Patreon. It's not unfortunately, you're doing it to support the channel because you like me. Also, comment down below, subscribe if you would like to support the channel. Thank you. Let's look at the Goblin Acolyte of Maglubiet. So this is a entry-level Goblin Priest. These are pretty interesting in that they have very hard focus on their battle axe. The battle axe is like the patron saint weapon of Maglubiet, the bloodied axe. So I did give them a special trait. Well, let's look at some of the special traits here. We have Child of Maglubiet, so they have advantage on saving throws against being frightened. Maglobiet instills a natural-born fear inside of every goblinoid creature that worships him. Essentially, they're afraid of their god, because if they do die, they are probably going to be horribly tortured by him in the afterlife. So they have saving throws against being frightened, because if they ran away from combat and angered him, who knows what he would do to them. You'll notice these goblins are also wisdom-based casters, of course. They are priests, so they are clerics. We have Warcaster, because Maglobiet is a war domain god, which gives them advantage on concentration checks, and they can cast single target spells as opportunity attacks. That makes them pretty strong. Now this is just a lower level priest of Maglobiet, so we have the Bloodied Axe special trait. This is their iconic trait. While in the goblin's hands, its battle axe is magical, and it deals an extra 1d10 necrotic damage that is already included. It's a passive, but it's on there to explain where that damage is coming from. Let's look at the actions here. So they don't have multi-attack, they just have the War Priest ability to make 2 weapon attacks. That comes from the War Domain Cleric stat blocks. So they can only do this 2 times per rest, so they actually get weaker the longer combat goes on. So they're not quite like a fighter that could just keep making 2 attacks a turn. These actually have a limited pool of multi-attack that they have. So, you know, they deal pretty decently high amounts of damage. 2d10 damage on a hit, and they can make 2 attacks. That's essential. If, in theory, mathematically speaking, you would roll 2 attacks, both hitting, dealing the maximum amount of damage each die can do, that would be 44 points of damage. But that's like that's like lottery level rare instance there, so that's not going to be something you have to really worry about. And then you have the spell casting, of course. These are clerics. Have low level spells here for the first level goblin caster, and I have just some spells that target the creature. You have them on the stat block, so you don't have to go look up what these spells do, but some of the other ones you would have to go look them up, because if I put them all, the stat block would go from this to that, and it would be a jump scare. We don't want jump scares. So Sacred Flame, Word of Radiance, Cure Wounds, just 3 basic, you know, cleric spells. And then the higher up you go, the more spells they get, and the harder these goblins get to damage and knock down, etc., etc. But you'll have to get the DLC to figure out what that is, you know. Anyways, let's look at some other stat blocks here. We're not quite done, and I did tell you I made a lot of these, and I did make a lot of them. Alright, this is my favorite goblin stat block that I've made. I got this goblin stat block from the little tiny lore tidbit we get from the Volo's Guide to Monsters for the Booyagh goblins. That's what they call magic. They call it Booyagh. This is a goblin whip. This gets an ability from Kurgorbayag, which is one of the goblin gods that work underneath Maglobiet. So it's sort of like a demigod that works with... It is what gives all the goblins an instinct to enslave others, so things that are weaker than them. Of course, they're never going to do this to an orc. They would get punted across the field if they tried to enslave orcs. No. So let's look at the whip here. This is an elite goblin wizard, and you're going to see why. This is a very deadly monster. Deceptively deadly. So CR7, you might want to actually throw this in against higher level player characters, but never leave this goblin alone. It's not meant to be a singular boss fight. It wants to be in a room with about 14 to 15 other goblins doing its thing. So here we go. This is my favorite goblin. We're going to go through the special traits really quickly. Keep in mind he has telepathy, so he can talk to you in your brain. So we have survival instinct. He gets +3 to his AC whenever he is bloodied. So that's going to keep his survivability high. He has Dodgy Bastard, so you have disadvantage on attack rolls against him whenever he's not like withheld person or grappled or something like that. He has Aura of the Overseer, so he adds his charisma bonus to his AC, which is going to make him pretty strong. He have 23 AC if survival instinct kicks in, so that's going to be incredibly difficult to hit him. Booyagh's mind link is an interesting one. He communicates telepathically to all creatures dominated by him as long as they are on the same plane of existence. And then he has Booyagh's boon. He can have a number of creatures dominated equal to his charisma mod, which is 4, but you can increase that if you want to make this like a BBEG. Now, let's look at his actions. He has the Mind Breaker Whip with a multi-attack. He uses his whip twice, or his brain burster twice, and then he also, whenever, depending on whatever he chooses after that, he can use Booyagh's domination. So let's look at the whip first. The Mindbreaker Whip has 1 attack, which is cracked. So he hits you with the whip. It's going to deal 1d4 slashing, and then it's also going to deal 5d4 psychic damage. Now, if this psychic damage reduces a humanoid or a giant to 0 HP, it instead goes to 1, and it becomes dominated by this goblin. Now, here's where it explains domination in Booyagh's domination. This is also an action that it can use. Goblin forces its will upon a humanoid or a goblin that it can see within 60 feet. That creature has to make a charisma saving throw, which that's a hard save to hit for most PCs because that's a dump stat. It's going to deal 3d6 psychic damage, and if the total damage dealt exceeds the creature's charisma score, it is dominated permanently until targeted by a greater restoration spell, and it obeys all commands from the goblin slavishly. Now, if you kill the goblin, obviously this would go away, right? I don't need to put that in there. That's pretty self-explanatory because nothing would be dominating that creature anymore. But 3d6 damage, if the damage exceeds the creature's charisma score, it is dominated. That's deadly, and it can do this up to 4 creatures. Now, you can put in that maybe it has creatures already dominated when you start the fight, because that would make sense, but that means this goblin can have any creature at once, as long as it's a humanoid or a giant dominated. You can take a champion stat block, you can take... Sorry, my dog's whining. You can take any creature that is a humanoid or a giant, give it could be dominated, so giant, anything. So we have the final thing here, the Magic of Clan Gore. The Magic of Clan Gore. Clan Gore is the domain that Booyagh lives upon. So Brain Burster is its one magical pseudo spell that it can use. So what this does is it does 3d4 psychic damage. It has a range of 80 feet, and once it hits you with this, you have disadvantage on charisma saves until the end of the goblin's next turn. And if this damage reduces you to 0, your brain explodes inside your head. So that's a pretty interesting ability there. This is a way for the creature to have its own built-in combo. So it uses Magic of Clan Gore. It shoots this bolt of psychic energy into you. It causes your brain to pulse, and then it hits you with Booyagh's domination, giving you disadvantage on this charisma save. Now, let's keep in mind that there is still one final thing here. There's a reaction. This reaction is called Redirect Attack. When a creature targets the goblin with an attack, the goblin swaps place with another dominated creature within 5 feet, making the chosen creature the new target. So if he dominates the wizard, he's going to call the wizard to his side, have the wizard, like a turret, casting spells. And then when the ranger tries to take that kill shot on the goblin, he's going to take the wizard and put him in front of him so that the ranger shoots the wizard. So you'll notice with this goblin, his hit points aren't very high with 39, but he has all these things that give him survivability by forcing attacks to hit other creatures. His AC gets higher the lower HP he gets too. Now, if you just hit him with something like a Disintegrate somehow, you can vaporize him, but this makes him a very hard creature to hit. This is why this one was so fun to make. It's a very evil, it's a very mean creature. Putting multiple of these in a fight it would be a little bit adversarial, I would say. Keep it 1 or 2. These should probably be somewhat rare of a creature that you're going to run into, but very deadly nonetheless. I think you can take most of these that I've shown you here and challenge a high-level party, a low-level party, a mid-level party fairly consistently with them. I hope you enjoyed these creature stat blocks here today. I have been DM Dungeon Mastery. I'm sorry about the wait that this took me to make this video. It's been a long journey. I've made 35 plus goblin stat blocks here, so I'm not saying good night. I'm just saying. Thank you for joining me. I will see you in the next video, where we might be doing a special type of video which involves goblin combat tactics. Let me know how you feel about that in the comments below.